All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, the Education Coordinator for Marlene's Market in Deli. Today's special guest, we have Patty Peterson, a WSU Master Gardener, here to speak with us. We are so pleased to have her with us this lovely afternoon, speaking on drought tolerant gardening. Yay, Patty. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Before we get started, I would just like to say that I really like to have a conversation rather than me just talking at people. So in addition to using the chat function, please feel free to just kind of interrupt if you have a pressing question, and we'll talk about it as we go. I think that we all get a whole lot more out of a presentation when we do it that way. So feel free, don't be shy, and we'll just have a conversation as we go. So thank you, all of you, for joining today. It's such a perfect day to be out in the garden that it's really wonderful to have you here instead. And I really have to tell you something that I find really fun about this presentation. I've been giving it, I don't know, 2 or 3 years now. And the first time I ever gave it, it was on a spring day and it was a downpour. And there was something just a heck of a lot of fun about giving a presentation on a drought tolerant gardening in the middle of a downpour. But those of us that have lived around here for a while know that that's spring and that this is summer. So with that, let's get started. So I think when we talk about drought tolerant gardening, a lot of people think that we have to do things that are kind of barren and spiky looking and maybe a lot of succulents and things along those lines. But in the Pacific Northwest, we have so many options that it's almost impossible to believe. So let's talk about why we care about it, why it matters, and then what are some of the options that we have to actually implement it. In Western Washington, we always hear about how rainy it is in Western Washington. And those of us that have lived here for any bit of time, and by the way, I've grown up here, I'm a native, so I've seen it change. I've seen the weather and felt the patterns of the weather. We actually receive only about 40 inches per year. And if you think about it, that's not all that rainy. Pittsburgh, for instance, gets 45 inches a year, and we never talk about Pittsburgh as being a rainy place. So I find that particularly interesting between you and I and the fence post. But how we get our rain is the interesting part. I went down when I didn't mean to. Out of that 40 inches, our summertime, May through September, we only get a total of about 7 inches a year. So 7 inches over the course of 4 months is really not a heck of a lot of rain. And we really follow a Mediterranean climate with cool, wet winters and warm, dry summers. And again, we don't tend to think of the Mediterranean as being particularly rainy either, but our precipitation total is just about the same as it is in that band that we call the Mediterranean. Now, here's the one that I really like to focus on quite a bit because goodness knows we all like a bit of lawn. It keeps the dust down, it keeps the mud away, and what the heck, it's a great place to have a game of croquet. But they do require 1 to 1.5 inches of water per year or per week year round. So we get 7 inches total May through September, and lawns require 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week. So when you think about that, that's an interesting equation. Roses is another favorite of so many people, and with reason. They're lovely, lovely flowers, but they require at least 2 inches of water per week in the summertime, making that an interesting equation as well. Why does it matter? Well, even with the rain that we do get, Washington is growing, and that is almost exclusively Western Washington. Washington grew between 2010 and 2020, it grew by 14.6%. So we now have approximately 7,700,000 people in Washington. And almost all of them came from other places, which would make sense. And almost all of them moved to Western Washington. And that means that we have more water needs. And we all know it's getting warmer. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we sure knew that. But between 1920 and 2003, which is the latest I could find an actual scientific measurement, the average temperature in the Pacific Northwest rose by 1.5 degrees. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, it's a heck of a lot when you start thinking about the climate. Then where do we get our water? Most of our water reserves are held in the snowpack in the Cascade and Olympic Mountains. And the snowpack in the Cascades has declined by a quarter between 1950 and 2006. Those of you that are skiers probably know that there's a huge variability with that number, but on average, it's fallen by 25%. And that means 25% less water available to us in the summertime. At the same time, our population is growing by 15%. Some watering systems can really help with that. And these watering systems, well, drip watering and soaker hoses really water only the plants. It doesn't put a lot of spray up in the air, which can be evaporated by the time it hits the ground, or so it never does hit the ground, or be wind blown on you're watering the neighbor's plants or the road. They're not overly effective for lawns, although the soaker hoses can be. I know historically when I was a kid, we used soaker hoses on our lawn, and those can be used upright or face down. If they're upright, they do spray, but I think you all know what we're talking about. They're either a piece of plastic that has the little holes punched in it, or some of them are almost like a rubber that just sweats water out of them. And those keep water lower to the ground, or if the plastic one is flipped over so that the openings in it are face down, it also then waters the ground directly and doesn't get it in the air. Well, a couple of things that I like a great deal, and I first started following these somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago, are the weather sensing irrigation controllers. So many of you have built-in sprinkler systems, but you can also use these on just a hose spigot and connect a sprinkler to them. And they actually use the satellites to follow the weather. And they will water only when there is no precipitation. So you don't have to think about, do I need to run out and turn the water on? They will do it automatically based on whether or not it's rained or not. When I first started following some of these controllers, and I'll talk about this one and the one below together because they're merging now. They used to be pretty separate. The bottom one adds an extra layer that an individual user can program, where you set up the definition of the ground you're watering. So what direction is it facing? Does it face south? Does it face north? Is it sandy soil? Is it clay soil? What kind of plants do I have? Do I have plants that need a lot of water, plants that need a little water? And they connect to the internet. Most of these do. And it will actually manage an entire watering schedule for you. So in addition to knowing has it rained or not, it knows based on the type of soil that you have, the exposure, and the type of plants, should they need water or not. And I'll water for the amount of time that should be required. When I first started following this 15 or 20 years ago, they were about $500, and I wanted one so badly, but $500 for a sprinkler controller seemed pretty hefty back then. They have come down substantially in price now, I'm happy to say. And you can find them, for instance, at Costco for about $200. And again, it's still pricey, but when you think of how much water is typically wasted when we water using manual approaches, many of us can get that money back even over the course of 1 year on the water bill. And so you're using that resource so much more effectively. Are there any questions about these? About any questions about watering? Okay.
Don't be shy, folks.
Oh dear. I'm having trouble getting my screen to advance. There we go. Drought tolerant gardening can be really gorgeous. And I think I just flipped to the end for some reason. Hang on. I did. See, pretty pictures to come along. Watering approaches can help. So the one on the right is an example of a drip watering system, and it's just showed installed above ground, up high so you can see it. Usually they're installed right on the ground, so you really don't see them. But how you water is really important. If you're going to have that lawn, instead of watering it 15 minutes most every day, water it very deeply 1 to 2 times per week. And then we've always heard that if we leave the clippings on the lawn, that it's going to turn into thatch and it's going to ruin the lawn. And that's actually an urban myth. If you cut it so that leaving the lawn long, that's a hard thing to say, and leaving those clippings on the grass, it actually fertilizes the lawn for you. And you can't even see it. You don't see it. It doesn't damage the lawn. In fact, it really is beneficial for the lawn. And then certainly adding compost and aerating in the spring. Because if your lawn is healthy, it requires less water. And if your lawn is healthy, you don't get as many weeds. Leaving the grass long shades the roots of the lawn and keeps it cooler, and you have less evaporation and less need for water. Some people might say, yeah, does that really work? You got to give me a break. Watering deeply 1 to 2 times per week. What do you mean by that? And it's 30 to 45 minutes, 1 or 2 times a week. And I have a great example. We were getting my parents' house prepped for sale not long ago, and the lawn was a mess. Excuse me. The lawn was the lawn was an absolute mess. It was brown, it was weedy, it looked terrible. And so we chose to change his timer on his sprinkler system. So instead of 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon, 5 days a week, we started watering it 45 minutes on Tuesdays and Saturdays. We started mowing it lawn instead of scalping it. And within about 3 weeks, we had a lovely, lush green lawn. We didn't add any fertilizer. We didn't do any of those things. We just changed how we dealt with it. On borders, that's a great place to use drip watering. And probably most of you are familiar with that by now. And again, I first put in my first drip watering system close to 20 years ago. It's easy to do. A regular person can do it. I put one in a veggie patch last year. It took me about an hour and a half and 1 glass of wine in the evening, and worked brilliantly. You don't get many weeds between the plants because you're watering just the plants. And so the areas between the plants where you tend to walk through the garden patch tends to not grow many weeds. Again, water deeply and less often. The water twice is an interesting one, and you can do it on your lawn as well. So we all know that when it gets really hot outside, the land just bakes and becomes parched. And when you start to water, the water just rolls right off the ground, and it's wasted, it seems. So some way to get around that is you water first for about 10 minutes, and then you stop for another 10 minutes to 15 minutes. And then when you start the sprinkler up again, that water will all soak straight into the ground. So instead of continuing the runoff, you put some water out there, let it soak into the ground for a few minutes, and that will open up the soil. And when you turn that sprinkler back on, that water will just absorb into the soil. Some of these programmable controllers will allow you to do that. You can set up that programmable timer to come on for 10 minutes, stop for 10, and then water for another half an hour. So that's a really good way to approach that. I think most of us do this. If we've been in gardening much at all, we tend to put our very thirsty plants all kind of together in the sun, and we tend to put our not quite as thirsty, I got that backwards, our not thirsty plants together in the sun and our thirsty ones together in the shade. If you're not doing that, that's probably a good way to do it, because then when you're watering each plant according to what it needs by putting them all together. A couple of things that we can also do, we can install a rain barrel. And it's not a magic fix, because if you look at the size of a rain barrel and the amount of water that comes off a roof, your rain barrel is going to fill up pretty darn quickly. But that still will give us water that we can use to hand water here and there. And it's better than having that rain just leach off into our septic systems and sewage systems. Rain gardens are another great approach. And I know we have several folks on the call that are rain garden experts and would love to chat with you about how we go about building those. But the concept behind the rain garden is to take the water that would run off a roof, a patio, a driveway, and to pull it instead all into an area where it will run into a garden that is built on a depression, which is meant to collect that rainwater. you put plants in it that are really good at having their toes really, really wet periodically and really dry other times. And that way you're really reusing that water and recharging the aquifer, and you're keeping it out of our storm systems that wind up running all of the potential contamination down into the bay. When the water goes through the soil, it takes most of the contaminants out of it. And so you're decontaminating the water, and you're also recharging the aquifer and allowing us to use it over again. Questions or thoughts on watering systems and how we approach those watering systems? I see something in the chat. Let's take a look at that. Is there harm to not watering lawn in the summer? There actually isn't. It will go brown and it will come back in the spring. It sometimes will get a little bit weedy, but again, in the spring, if you put some mulch on it and water it well, it will come back really strongly. So, yep, it's not a problem at all. Yes, you can. So the question is, can you adapt the control to existing sprinkler systems? And yes, you can. So sprinkler systems have a controller on, it's usually mounted on, I don't know, a wall, or a garage wall is not an unusual place to see it. Usually it's a little green box and it's got some wires coming out of it. And you can actually just swap that out. You take that one out, put the other one in, connect the wires up, and you are good to go. Questions, other questions about that? Comments? Okay, moving on. Let's see if I can get this. For some reason, my screen freezes when I go. There we go. There are some little things you can do that make a difference and actually make things look good. You can put some rocks in, and that seems like kind of a funny thing to do for watering. But if you put the rocks in the right place, it will slow down the runoff that you get through your yard and through your garden. If you walk out there during a really rainy time, of which when we get rain now, we tend to get heavier rains, so it's easy to see, you can see where your water's running, where it's coursing down through your garden. And you can put decorative rocks where it's running and channel it different directions to slow it down. And that means you'll have less erosion, and it will carry fewer contaminants in that down into the storm drains and into the drainage systems. So that's just a really, really simple place. Most of us have rocks in our yard somewhere that we can use to do that. You can also purchase really gorgeous rocks, but regular old rocks will work just fine. And if they're placed nicely in amongst your shrubbery, they look really nice. Planting in the fall is another thing to do. You don't have to water your transplants so much. I think most of us know that when you first put a new transplant in the ground, it needs a heck of a lot of water. So if you put it in the fall, nature's going to water it because we get a lot of rain in the fall and winter. And because it's cooler, it doesn't need as much water. Plus you have the benefit of come spring, you have a much larger, healthier plant that comes back rather than just trying to put it in the spring and starting with a baby. Mulching, I can't say enough about mulch. You know, it, besides looking nice, it reduces the evaporation, so you don't need to water as much, and it keeps down the weeds, which we all like. And the weeds that do come through are really leggy and they pull easier. And it keeps the roots of your plants cooler, which tends to keep them healthier. Our soil below, I have a question. Our soil below is rocky, so water just drains below without retention. Surely, is that the water or the soil underneath your topsoil? If it's the soil underneath the topsoil, one of the things you can do is to add compost, which will slow down the rate at which the water goes through your topsoil. And that will hold more of it in that ever important topsoil for your plants. So amend your topsoil with compost and you should have less issue with that. And again, it should require less watering at that point. Other questions about that, about watering and some of the little things we can do? Okay, back to this again. Um, Speaking of which, compost can really help. It will help sandy or rocky soil to retain moisture, and it actually helps clay soil drain more readily. We have interesting soil. We have a band of clay that runs right through the middle of the property. And I will tell you that just turns to concrete this time of year. But by continually adding compost to it, we're starting to get it a little bit better. Our other soil is lovely, gorgeous soil, and I don't usually use any amendments in it whatsoever. But compost is just terrific, both for your plants and for your soil. And obviously, if we have healthy soil, we get healthier plants. I don't know who hasn't heard plant the right plant in the right place. It's kind of the mantra for anybody who's ever set foot in a garden, but it's so darn important if you want to have happy, healthy, pretty plants. The tag will tell you when you buy a plant at the nursery, it's going to tell you what kind of light it needs, what kind of soil it needs, and how much moisture. And by the way, those tags are really kind of suggestions as opposed to hard and fast, this is it and only this. Most of us have had plenty of experience with planting a plant in a little different spot and finding it did well, or planting it exactly where it said to and finding it doesn't do well. But for the most part, they work quite well. And again, group plants together that have the same type of needs. So if you have a south-facing slope, put a lot of Mediterranean type plants out there and put them all together. They're not going to need much rain. They love the sun and it's all good. On the other hand, if you have a really shady spot, put your ferns and your lovely things in there. If you plant native plants, then typically you have far less maintenance. They are suited to the environment and they almost always need less care. I'm sorry, I need to take one really quick break. Elizabeth, can I take just one quick second?
Not a problem. I had to take care of my little dog too, so.
Tub shuts off.
Well, folks, at Marlene's, at both store locations, we have some really amazing plant starts that are available, and vegetables, some really nice house plants for sale.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. we have people working on the house, and
oh yes, so
yeah,
the little doggo's like, "What's that?"
So, did you answer the question about the ground covers?
Oh, I did not. I'm actually not seeing the questions. I think
that's okay. I've got them. We're good.
Okay.
So Mary made a statement that ground covers can work in place of mulch, and yes, they can. There are any number of ground covers that will also help keep your soil cool, not require a great deal of moisture themselves, and also help really keep the weeds down. There's lots and lots of them out there. If you are going to plant non-natives, then choose plants that are from a climate similar to your own. I had, at my last home, I had a south-facing sandy bank and had Mediterranean plants all the way through that bank. And I watered, maybe 4 times a year in the summertime. I didn't have to do much trimming because I let them get kind of like this picture is, where they just sort of took over and made themselves happy. So again, if you choose the plants that are from a climate where it's cool and wet in the winter and warm and dry in the summer, you're going to do really well and have a whole lot less care than if you choose plants that are, for instance, native to the Southeast, maybe where they like the hot and humid summers, which we just don't tend to have. And drought tolerant gardening just plain doesn't have to look like this. I think that for many of us, we think of drought tolerant gardening, also known as Xeriscape, and that's spelled with an X rather than a Z. And I think this is what we tend to think of. And we are so fortunate in the Northwest to have so many plants to choose from that are pretty darn happy with little to no water in the summertime and having their toes really wet in the winter. So here's what drought tolerant looks like in the Pacific Northwest, which is just a heck of a lot different than what some of us have in our heads. So the next few slides kind of go through a handful of the literally hundreds of options that we have for putting in our plants into drought areas. Perennials are a perennial favorite of mine. I love the fact that they come back regularly year after year. I love the fact that after about 3 years, you can divide them and have more of them. So I enjoy them quite a bit. These guys, pretty much all of the plants that are in this slide are plants that I have used over the years and with really good success. Lewisia is one of my absolute favorites. It looks so darn delicate. It's a native, by the way. It looks incredibly delicate, and it can sit out in the baking 90-degree heat without any issue whatsoever in full sun, with just a little bit of water tossed on it here and there. Coreopsis, if you cut those blooms back, they'll just keep blooming all summer long. Lupins will reseed themselves and build into a beautiful patch. Blue-eyed grass is another one that is just really fun for me because it looks so darn delicate. It only gets 3 or 4 inches tall. So if you have an area near a walkway maybe, or something along those lines, you can stick it in there and it will just kind of start gradually multiplying, and you'll wind up with a really nice big patch of it over a period of time. There's also yellow-eyed grass. I just happen to be a real fan of the blue-eyed. And that, by the way, you can grow from seed really easily if you can find the seed. Butterfly weed, you know, we all need to do what we can for our pollinators, and so we got to have those. Sedums are more along what we tend to think of when we tend to think of drought-tolerant gardening. There's one that Jody would know the name of, but I don't, but it looks like evergreen. It looks like evergreens that are about 2 inches high, and it'll just blanket the area in what looks like maybe a juniper, but it's a sedum. So lots and lots of choices for perennials in the dry sun. Here's a few more. Lavender, I don't know anybody that doesn't love lavender. It sometimes has a reputation for being hard to deal with, and I've never quite understood that. Sometimes I ignore and abandon it because I just don't have time to deal with it, and the next spring it comes up and has some woody areas and I cut them out and it just goes on just fine. But if you shear it back at the end of its bloom time, it does particularly well. Russian sage, it's used to be just the big sprawly kinds, and now there's some hybrids that are a lot shorter and fluffier. But again, it's one that just, if you have a large space and a lot of sunshine, it fills it nicely and requires no effort whatsoever and will grow in any kind of soil I've ever found. Agastache or Agastache, depending on which school of thought you're from. There are many, many hybrids of this at this point in time. They smell a little bit like licorice, and they're just glorious this time of year. Salvias tend to be native, although there are lots and lots of hybrids. But because they come from native stock, most of them do really well without any attention whatsoever. We've got a question here. Is blue-eyed grass tolerant of occasional foot traffic if someone gets off the sidewalk? Yep, it is. It's just a hardy little guy. I'm very fond of him. It does really well. This other shrub, this shrubby kind of perennial here is an Amsonia, and some sites will tell you it's drought tolerant and some sites will tell you that it needs a lot of water. So I think it's one that probably is very dependent on what type of soil you have. So if you have a good loamy soil that retains moisture moderately well, it's probably fine as a drought tolerant plant. But if you have a rocky, sandy, dry soil, I would not use him in the hot sun. And I left him in here because it's a really good example of, if you do a Google search on a plant, you'll find one site that says one thing and one site that says something else. And I think plants are a lot like children. It sort of depends on where you stick them, what they're going to wind up doing. So if there's something that you're absolutely in love with, stick it in the ground, give it a try, keep an eye on it. And if it's not happy, move it elsewhere and be good with it. Perennials for the dry shade. We have quite a bit of dry shade around here underneath our conifers, which is a lovely thing. So Jacob's ladder is another one of those where I have seen tags that says it's in the shade. I've seen tags that says it's in the sun. I've seen tags that say it needs water. I've seen tags that say it's drought tolerant. So I'll tell you about my experience with it, which is I have it in the sun, I have it in the shade, I have it where it gets water, and I have it where it doesn't get water, and it's happy in all of them. So, and it seeds itself rather nicely, but not hugely profusely. So if you like lovely blue plants that get about 12 to 18 inches high and bloom nicely in the middle of the summer and will make more of themselves but not be invasive, that's a great one. Foam flower in the shade is just lovely and will gradually expand and expand until you have a really nice large patch of it. Sword ferns are probably one of our most universal plants in the Pacific Northwest. My Mediterranean bank had sword ferns on it that were native on the bank. They grew there themselves. They were on the hot, sandy soil facing south. And while they weren't big and lush, they were happy and healthy. If you have them in the shade with lots of water, they get really big and lush, but they can go just about anywhere. Maidenhair ferns will do well in the dry shade, but if you have them where it's damp, they will do really, really well and come close to taking over. Questions about any of these guys? Yes, we have a question in chat. My sedum is getting eaten. Deer or rabbits? Could be either. I have had deer eat sedum and the big sedums, not just the little guys. So I have tended to stay away from them simply because we have so many deer. I tend to use a deer spray on them, one of the organic sprays that is supposed to keep them off. And I really have to tell you that I had these big, beautiful autumn joy sedums. And clearly the deer thought, well, I was going to give it a shot, even though it had that smell to it, took a bite off of it and dropped it right beside the plant. It was as though I had come by and just cut it off and dropped it on the ground. It was really disheartening. I think the upshot to that is deer and rabbits will try just about anything if they're hungry and thirsty enough. Can blue-eyed grass tolerate mucopine pine needles falling on it? I have never had trouble with having anything fall on it or grow on it. It just is so darn resilient. At the same time, you wouldn't want it to get buried. So if you did notice that it had quite a number of them falling on it, at some point you would probably want to go over and just kind of brush them off. But it shouldn't hurt it any. More perennials for dry shade. Hostas, hostas do really well in the dry, although they do better if they have a little extra water. But again, they're just deer candy. And so unfortunately, I don't have them as much as I love them. There's so many beautiful varieties of hostas. Epimedium is one that I just love, and we don't see it used very much. And I don't know if it's just, I don't know why it's not, but it is reliable. It grows into a really nice patch over time. The flowers on this one are pink, but some are white and some are kind of an orangey color. I have several versions of epimedium that I just really, really like. And the deer don't tend to like it, and I'm assuming the rabbits probably don't either. But it grows nicely in dry shade. This is pulmonaria, which it blooms in the spring. And you used to see it in stores a lot in nurseries, but I don't see it as much as I used to. But pulmonaria is just a really, really hardy one and cheery blossoms early in the year. Bleeding heart, same thing. It comes out early in the spring and has these lovely blooms, and it dies back and disappears in the summer. It's completely gone. It's almost like magic. I don't know that I've ever seen the leaves even lie on the ground. It seems to just vanish into thin air. But then next spring, it's back and happy as can be again. So bleeding heart is a good one to plant around perennials or shrubbery perennials really, that come up later in the spring, so that the bleeding heart's disappearing just as those other perennials are coming up. And that works out really well. Hellebores, I think everybody in the world has come to love hellebores, because I think we all need that shot of here's something blooming and it's January. Just any little bit of encouragement in January and February is something that every gardener needs. But again, they've hybridized them so many places. There's so many ways that, they're just glorious. And You know, again, mine in the summertime are in the shade. I don't water them. Once or twice a month really is all. And they do well and they come back every spring just happy as can be. Euchra is another one that the deer love, so I tend to stay away from, even though I love it and all its different variations. The lime green in the shade is absolutely glorious. You know, it just lights up the whole area. You know, if I could convince myself to go out there and spray the deer spray on it a little more often, it'd probably work. Oh, good idea, Jody. Jody is our rain garden. She runs the rain garden specialists for Master Gardeners and knows more about plants than I think anyone I've ever known. And she has a great suggestion to plant the bleeding heart with hosta because the bleeding heart will be disappearing right about when the hosta is coming up. Do you cut the hellebore flower stalk when flowers are spent? The flowers on hellebores are not actually the flowers. So you can leave them and typically they look okay until well into the summertime. And at that point, you'll start seeing the hellebore is starting to sprout some new growth. And at that point, you can cut all of the old growth back, including the old, what we think of as flowers, if that makes sense. The flowers will often turn a different color as it gets into the summertime. Almost, some of them turn almost kind of golds and oranges. It isn't going to hurt them if you cut them off, but they're not required to do that either. I lose my cursor and can't get back to my screen. We have a lot of trees and shrubs that are drought tolerant, and which makes sense because these are natives for the most part here. Vine maples, you know, vine maples in the right place can rival any Japanese maple I've ever seen. And I love Japanese maples. But the vine maples turn the most glorious, brilliant shades of red and orange in the fall. And depending on how much sunlight they get, they can be tall and skinnier, but they can be short and bushy. And they're pretty much impervious to anything we can throw at them around here in the Pacific Northwest. Knick is, besides the fact I love to say it, is one of the coolest ground covers around. It has those beautiful pink flowers on it in the springtime, and then those turn to berries in the late summer and early fall. Occasionally I'll have people say Knick is really hard to grow. It gets all black, and what's its trouble with it getting all black? And its trouble is that it got too much water in the summertime. So Knick thrives with all but no water, making it a terrific ground cover if you have a slope that faces south. I have some on our property here, and I have not watered it yet this year, and it is just as happy as can be, which is pretty hard for me to believe. I just haven't found enough time to water that spot. But the Knick is just happy and healthy and spreading. So if it's turning black, it's getting too much water, and so you want to cut back on that. Ceanothus, one of the things that I really like about it is that the bumblebees adore it. If you have a big patch of ceanothus, you're going to have a whole lot of bumblebees. And in these days of trying to keep our pollinators healthy, it's a great plant to find a spot to stuff in your yard somewhere. It comes in a lot of different forms. There's a prone form. So if you have a rockery, it can kind of flow over the rocks. If you have a big empty spot that you'd like to see a big flash of blue for most of the summer, I had some on that south-facing sandy bank that grew to be somewhere between 5 and 6 feet tall. They were absolutely huge and beautiful, and the bumblebees just loved it. And there's also dwarf ones. Some people, yeah, there are dwarf ones as well that grow maybe 3 feet high, but it's a lovely plant and really helps with our pollinators. Noble firs are not just Christmas trees. They actually grow native in our Cascades. So in your yard, they'll do pretty darn well as well. And if you happen to be on a place where you are on a facing the salt water and maybe get a lot of salt spray, the shore pine is just fine with that salt spray. Mock orange, I have to stick on here because my mother always loved mock orange. It's another one that blooms early in the spring and can really bring a lot of cheer when we all need it. Herb gardens are another thing that are really, really happy in the sunshine. And if you have a deer problem, herbs can be really helpful. So deer don't like strong smelling things, and they don't like things with fuzzy leaves, and herbs tend to be strong smelling, and many of them have fuzzy leaves. So what I have done is interplanted some of the things that I really, really want to have, deer or no deer, and interplanted them with herbs. And I have less deer damage per deer than my neighbors, is maybe the right way to put it. And last year I actually interplanted herbs in my vegetable garden and had far less deer damage in the vegetable patch as well. And in addition, they are lovely, lovely plants. Most of them are perennial. Most of them survive cutting and cutting and cutting. And who does not love fresh herbs when you're cooking? So I can't say enough about thinking about adding some herbs to your garden. They're also, pollinators love the herbs as well. So those are lovely things to stick in your dry garden. And grasses, I have a spot that I call my prairie. It is in the sun all day long, and it has grasses form the backbone of it. And then I've interplanted it with quite a number of perennials and ground covers. And the grasses, many of them do very, very well in hot, dry spots. You need to read the tag carefully because some do require a lot of water, but most of the grasses don't. And then there's a whole separate group of plants, the caryxes, that are sometimes called grasses also. They look a lot like them, although as Jody pointed out, grasses have flat leaves and caryxes have round ones. But there are many caryxes that also like the dry. So the grasses can just be really beautiful in their coloring. There's quite a number of them that are the kind of the blue-green colors. There are many of them that turn really beautiful fall colors come fall. And I tend to leave mine up rather than cutting them back in the fall, and it provides food for the birds and shelter for all the critters in the yard all through the winter time. And then I cut them back in the springtime before they start growing again. But you can just do that with shears. You don't have to go out there and cut them. You can just kind of slice them off and they'll be good. So planting in drought can be really gorgeous. It doesn't have to be, all sedums and cactuses. We have so many things, and these are just barely scratching the surface of the plants that we have to choose from. And I think we all know that it's getting hotter and we need to control our water better. And this is a great way to do it, is to put in just glorious drought tolerant plants in your yard. Maybe cut back that croquet patch just a little bit and add in maybe some more lavender. And that way when you're playing croquet, you've got a great fragrance going by as well. Questions or comments?
What I would like to say is that last picture, I just want to be there all the time. That looks like paradise.
Yeah, and I, looking at this picture, it's like there's nothing there that needs water. Isn't that amazing?
Self-sufficient. I love it.
Yeah. I have had a lot of fun learning about drought tolerant plants, and it kind of started with that south facing slope that I had. It was really sandy and I wanted to make sure it wasn't going anywhere. And so the more I dove into it and the more I learned, the more I have come to really, truly appreciate and love the drought tolerant plants. They're just glorious. Got a couple of comments. Are you going to do a presentation on rain gardens and how to create one? Great class today. There are several of us in Master Gardeners that do presentations on rain gardens. I do. I think Jody has done them. Gail, have you done them? But yes, we can do that. And so if Elizabeth would like to work with us, we will find one of us to do a rain garden presentation for you. It's another fun one as far as I'm concerned.
That would be wonderful.
And Betsy says that drought tolerance is my passion and we've covered it beautifully. Well, thank you. They're beautiful plants to cover. Again, I really appreciate those of you that have spent your gardening Saturday hour here. It is, are there any planting plans available for parking strips? There are any number of drought tolerant planting guides that you can find online. There are a number of websites of nurseries online that specialize in Xeriscape type gardening, and many of them actually you can either purchase pre-planned gardens that would be in what they call the hill strip, or you can simply look at those plants and figure out, they tell you what plants are in there, and you can devise your own from those illustrations. And certainly there are any number of organizations that publish individual gardening plans. So yes, you can find them online, and I would probably do a search on drought tolerant planting strips or Xeriscape, Xeriscape. Yeah, Great Plant Picks Online has lists. High Country Gardens is one of the websites where I started learning about drought tolerant plants. And there are many others out there. Those are just ones that we're familiar with. So yeah, lots of them. It's a real fun thing.
It really, really is. And, you know, this is such an important topic, especially moving forward with, you know, being able to limit our water so that everyone can have accessibility to it.
Absolutely. It's becoming bigger and bigger problem, literally as we speak. Did I seed my prairie or purchase plants? Both. Both. I will also say that a lot of my yard gardens over time, I still have to teach myself to call it a garden instead of a yard. But a lot of my gardens over time have been purchased at what I call the sad little plant bins. So, you know, at the nurseries, they have discount plants, almost all of them, where they just need some water and a good shearing and some love, and they do just fine. So I've gotten my plants from just about everywhere. I've seeded some, I have had friends give me some, I have divided them. I have gone to the sad little plant bins, so a little bit of everything to build it.
What is the purple?
I know it's a thyme, I believe. I believe that's thyme.
Okay, like creeping thyme.
Yep, which does really well in the dry. I planted, I can't say this, Sherry, helichrysum among sedum by chance. Was surprised to hear sedum were being eaten. Well, my sedum sure were. I might try it again here. I'm hoping that the deer in where I live now are different than the deer from a mile away where I moved from. I actually had deer eating my crocosmia, and I've never seen deer eating crocosmia before, but this year they left them alone. I think they finally are tall enough. Crocosmia, by the way, does really well with limited water too. They just start kind of drooping over a little bit, but then when you do get around to watering them, they come back upright. My health strip currently has lava rock. Can I plant in it, or do I need to remove and mulch? You would need to be able to get down to the soil below the lava rock to plant. And so without knowing about that soil, I don't know, but you can plant through it and use the lava rock as mulch still. But you have to actually take the lava rock away where you're going to put the plant in, and then dig down into the soil. And if the soil down there is ugly, which it often is in those health strips, you can throw in some good garden soil and a bit of compost and make your hole generous that you do that to give the roots enough space to start growing out. I always, when I do that, I like to mix in quite a bit of the native soil. So the plant gets used to that native soil, and when it needs to go out beyond its artificial soil, it's not such a shock for the plant. If you plant a plant into bad soil with just one little spot of soil, what you'll find is the roots never go beyond that one little spot of good soil. So you need to encourage them to go outbound. And again, watering deeply helps with that as well, because the roots have to go further to get their drink. And so it encourages those longer, healthier roots. Good questions. Very good questions.
Thanks.
So we We can all go out and start saving water while we have beautiful gardens, huh?
Exactly. Still have a beautiful garden and more water for everyone.
By the way, I have only watered my prairie this year, I think 3 times, and it's in full bloom at this point. So, and when I do water it, it gets watered really deeply. But I think we all have to just really think long and hard about the options that we have out there to have beautiful yards and doing things a little differently. So thank you. Oh, one more chat. Thank you, guys. It was just a compliment with folks leaving. So thank you very much. Appreciate the time. Elizabeth, back to you to wind it up. Oh, another
Thank
one.
you, everyone. Thank you so much for all the praise. Patty, you are phenomenal. It was
Oh, thanks.
so wonderful having you here this Saturday afternoon with your expertise. And it's also so great that some of the WSU Master Gardeners team was also with us too for that extra support. Thank y'all for being here. And thank y'all for tuning in on Facebook Live and here on Zoom. We wouldn't be able to have these wonderful classes without you and your interest. And I am definitely excited to plan some more classes with you, Miss Patty. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful time. And thank you. And I just want to say everyone has a wonderful weekend and take good care.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks for the opportunity.
Not a problem. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.